Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Happy Harvest Homestead. Before we begin the video, I want to apologize for not posting for a while. I've been sick, and among my symptoms was a really bad sore throat, so I wasn't able to speak at all for many days. So recording videos and speaking during those videos would have been impossible. But now I'm mostly better and I can speak again pretty normally. I'm still a little bit scratchy, so it might sound weird, but I'm going to try my best to continue posting videos. The first of which is going to be this one, which is about one of our newer endeavors, which I'm really excited about. As many of you know, we've been hatching a lot of chicks this year, and we're finally to the point where we have so many chicks that the infrastructure we have for them right now isn't enough to hold them all. So this big move was actually a little bit behind schedule. We had a new batch of chicks hatch in the incubator. We moved them from the incubator they hatched in into our what we call our dryer off brooder thing. It's an incubator that the humidity broke on, so you can't keep the humidity stable enough to successfully hatch eggs in there. But once the chicks are born, you can put them in there, and the warmth of the incubator that still works will help dry them off before we put them outside. So we had a whole bunch of chicks that were dried off in the little drying off incubator, and we still didn't have a place to put them because all of our chick areas were filled up with chicks we already had hatched. Both of the miniature pasture pens were already completely filled with chicks, and our two brooders that are not falling apart were also already full with some chicks in one and then a broody hen in the other. So we literally had nowhere to put these newest babies. And this was just the problem we'd had for a while, showing up so much so that we couldn't ignore it any longer. These pens aren't really the best permanent situation for chicks. We just had so many birds that we were like, hey, we aren't using these, so let's throw them in here. They're not really meant for chickens. And as you can see, like, our shelter system isn't that good, and it's kind of really crowded in there anyways. So we needed a new solution, and these newest batch of eggs that I just hatched just caused us to finally do something about it. And the solution I came up with was to baby chick proof the wire around our goat pen and then run the chicks in it with the goats. If we got some smaller wire to attach to the current wire so the chicks couldn't squeeze through, then all of our problems would be solved. There'd be lots of space. There's already a shelter, which would be the goat barn. We would just have to figure out some way to put the chick food in some area where the goats could not get to it, because goats eating chicken food is not a very good thing. So thankfully, even though I had really dropped the ball and not found a good solution to the problem we had for a long time and just let it continue to get worse and worse, I had the presence of mind to, a few days beforehand, get some wire before the chicks hatched. So when the situation got desperate, which was today, we were able to act immediately and not have to wait a few days to go to town to buy wire. We were able to get 5 rolls. As you can see, the little openings in the wire are small enough so that even newborn chicks can't squeeze through. They are 1 inch by 1 inch mesh openings. Each roll is 15 feet long and 24 inches high. I'm hoping this will be high enough so that especially the older chicks won't be able to flap or fly over this 24-inch small wire and squeeze through the bigger wire on top. We'll have to see how that goes, but I'm fairly confident that this will be high enough. So the plan was to move the oldest 2 group of chicks from their pens on the pasture into the goat barn area, then move the brooder chicks into one of the pens. Then that would leave the brooder open for the newest chicks in the incubator in the house to come out to the chicken coop. So we're moving different groups to different places, and I have to hurry up and do it all today because living in a tiny little incubator is not what these little chicks are meant for. It's too small, there's no food or water, no bedding. I did put some food and water in there temporarily, but the setup for them is far from ideal. So before I could get those poor babies out of there, I had to attach our small wire onto the goat fencing. And if you own goats, you will perfectly understand my decision to lock the goats in the barn while I was doing this. Working with goats around you is definitely not something you want to do. They love to rub on you and get into your stuff and chew on your things and jump on you and headbutt you. While it does sound kind of cute whenever you're not doing it, and maybe the first couple of times it is kind of cute. I ended up working out in the heat for several hours. I was so glad that there were not goats, making my job a lot worse. Putting up wire sounds really easy and fast, but it actually isn't. And at one point I decided I needed a break. My poor hands needed a break, my back needed a break. I believe at this point I was over halfway done, so I decided to get some of the chicks ready so as soon as I finished, I could put them in the goat area immediately. So I rigged up this contraption. It's a wheelbarrow with like a dirt sifter on top. And catching those chicks was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I believe there was like 35, and I moved them right next to the barn in the shade and went back to my project. Then I was finally done. I ended up not having enough wire to go the full length, so I took apart the pasture pen and put 2 of the panels kind of across. That wire also was small enough so that the chicks can't squeeze through. Then we'll go to town again and buy some more wire to finish off the rest of the thing another day. So there's been a lot of improvising and using junk we already had, but I finally got everything chick-proof. This area was the most difficult because of all the little nooks and crannies. I had to block them up with cinder blocks and pieces of wood, but I'm actually glad this area is here because I'm hoping that the chicks will be able to squeeze through and get away from the goats. And I'm thinking of putting the food in this area because the birds will be able to squeeze through the bars, but the goats won't be able to. That's the plan anyway. We'll have to see how that turns out. And I was finally able to let the goats out. They were very unhappy being cooped up for so long. Then I put the first batch of chicks in their new area. And got the second batch of chicks and put them in as well. At first, the chicks didn't know what in the world had happened to them, and the goats were also very confused and curious about the chicks. It wasn't long until everyone calmed down and the chicks started exploring their new area. I was surprised and a bit saddened that they were able to squeeze through the pallet door from the goat side of the barn to the rabbit side, and then they were able to jump into the colony that's in the middle of being remodeled. But I took a few bits of wood and cardboard and blocked the entrance so they can be in that little in-between area, but they can't go into the actual colony. I figure it's not that big of a deal, and it's a good place for them to get away from the goats, if they want to. It's going to be a definite adjustment, though, having chicks in the goat barn. Just getting out of the door was way different. Something else I was worried about was the chicks being able to find their way back at night, but all the chicks, except for one, either stayed in the barn or made their way back to the barn that night. I had to help this little guy, though. So it looks like most of the big chicks are hanging out here, and most of the little chicks are over here. They're kind of close to each other, but definitely separated into 2 separate groups. Then, in preparation for the next day, I dumped the scraps in the little special area where the goats couldn't get them, as you saw before with that one little guy who got lost. At least some of the chicks wandered far enough to discover this place earlier today, so I'm hopeful they will come back to it tomorrow morning and be able to eat their food. So that was half of my project done, even though it took a lot longer than the other half of the project. After getting the first 2 groups of chicks in their new home, I still had to get the 3rd and 4th groups situated. Even though I had to take apart 1 pasture pen to finish baby chick proofing the goat pen, we still had one that was fully intact, and it was fairly simple to move it to a new location and put our 3rd group of baby chicks in there, though I had to manually put them in the shelter because they didn't know how to get to it themselves. Then, finally, I was able to do the last group of baby chicks, the youngest babies who just hatched, get them out of that nasty incubator, but now they are in a big, fresh, clean-smelling brooder. Alright, so now all the chicks are in their new housing, and the goat barn is big enough that when the third group of chicks in the pasture get bigger, we can put them in with the first two groups, and we can keep putting the chicks in the goat barn area, and we don't have to keep scrambling to find new housing for the chicks. I'm planning on a lot more videos about these baby chicks and why we're hatching so many and what we're going to do with them, stuff we've learned from hatching them and things we do differently and things that have been successes that we like doing, so make sure you look out for those videos. But for now, I'm going to end this video here on a happy note of lots of happy farm animals in their new housing. Well, except for the goats. I'm not entirely sure if they're happy with their new roommates, but in the grand scheme of things, this is really the only place the chicks could go, so they're just going to have to deal with it. But all the other animals are happy. Thanks for watching!